Hello, everyone. Welcome in. We are going to wait just a few minutes for a few more folks to log in today before we get started. I know it is a beautiful sunny day, probably for most folks tuning in from across the US. I'm here in Seattle. My name is Meghna. I'm the event manager here at Book Larder. I am not sure exactly how hot it is, but I know it's going to get pretty hot this weekend. André is here with us he's in Philly. Penelope is joining us from Portland. If you'd like to, you can use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to let us know where you're listening from today. All right, we're going to give this just a few more minutes before we get started, but thank you to everyone who is attending and welcome on behalf of Book Larder. We are a cookbook shop here in the Fremont neighborhood of Seattle, and we've been very fortunate to be able to continue to reach readers and home cooks from all over the world and all over the country via our Zoom events. So thank you for joining us in this strange time. Hello, Laura is joining from Mexico City. Welcome. Today we are going to be talking about this brand new book called Booze Cruise, written by André Darlington. André is going to be joining us in conversation today with Penelope Bass, who is joining us from Portland again, and is over at Imbibe Magazine. So we'll introduce both of them in just a few minutes, but let's give you all a lay of the land before we get started. For anyone that's just joining us, you can use the chat function to speak with other audience members and to share your general comments and feedback. Just make sure you select the all panelists and attendees option if you'd like everyone to see your message. We will also have a question and answer portion at the end of the event if you'd like to ask any questions of André or Penelope. To submit your questions, you can just click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen so that Penelope can keep track of your questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible. So thanks for bearing with us. And then we'll go from there. We do have signed copies of Booze Cruise available at booklarder.com. I will post a link in the chat for anyone that's interested in purchasing a copy from us. You can support this author talk by grabbing your copy from us or from your favorite independent bookstore. So thank you for doing that. Let's see, what else? I'd like to introduce André Darlington. André Darlington is a former restaurant critic and restaurateur turned award-winning beverage writer. He is author of 5 cocktail books, including Booze Cruise, A Tour of the World's Essential Mixed Drinks, and Gotham City Cocktails, the official handcrafted food and drinks from the world of Batman. André is co-author of Booze and Vinyl, hailed by Esquire as one of the most anticipated books of 2018, which is when he was last in Seattle, here with us at Book Larder, and for which he traveled across the US in a mobile listening van. In 2016, he became an entertainment expert for Turner Classic Movies and co-wrote TCM's movie night menus. His first book, the influential The New Cocktail Hour, began a second life as a best-selling event guide when actress Jennifer Lawrence included it on her online wedding registry. André has been a wine columnist for Mandarin Quarterly, a cocktail columnist for Organic Life, and host of the weekly Farmers Market podcast. He's currently writing a companion volume to Booze and Vinyl, as well as the first global cocktail food compendium for Hachette. He lives and imbibes in Philadelphia. André is going to be joined by Penelope Bass. Penelope is the senior editor at Imbibe Magazine in Portland, Oregon, where you can find her drinking gin and tonics in the summer, big strong beers in the winter, and way too much coffee all year. I'd like to welcome both André and Penelope to the virtual Zoom room. Thank you so much for joining us from all the way in Portland and Philadelphia. We're so happy to have you here.
Hello.
Hi, thanks, Magna.
Thanks for having us.
And hello, André.
Hi, Penelope. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good. How's the West Coast weather?
It is toasty. Let me tell you what, I don't even want to think about this weekend's forecast. It is looking brutal.
It's perfect summer cocktail weather, right?
There you go. Get my gin and tonic on. Well, congratulations again on the book. I'm so happy to be getting to talk to you about it again. For folks joining us who might not be as familiar with your work, I know we just got your bio, but I'd love if you could give us a little background on your career as a writer, sort of how it relates to how you became so fascinated with cocktails.
Yeah, it's a good question. I started out as an IT guy after college, and I was writing for a weekly on the side. And then what became a restaurant reviewer. I wrote a lot about wine originally. And I pitched with my writing partner, my sister, who I wrote a number of books with, we pitched a cheese and wine book. And Running Press came back to us and said, we love your voice. We love what you do. Would you be interested in writing a cocktail book? And I had a cocktail column, which was a little unusual, I guess, that long ago in Midwestern Weekly. And we jumped at the chance. And that was in 2016. I had a restaurant at the time. Blessedly, I got out of that as the book career sort of exploded. But I actually started out in wine, which was really a great lesson, or a great background for cocktails and all the flavors. I got really lucky in that when I got out of college, which was 1998, we were just entering sort of the cocktail movement, or the craft cocktail movement, as it's become known. By the early 2000s, Milk and Honey was open in New York. Violet Hour had opened in Chicago in the early 2000s. I was living in Chicagoland at the time. Varnish opened in Los Angeles, probably mid 2000s, sometime 2007 or 2009 in Los Angeles. So my sort of drinking career, if I can call it that, really coincided with America reawakening to great craft cocktails. And the interest in cocktails has always really run deep. I love the pageantry, but I love the chefiness that the new generation of cocktailers brought to the bar.
Absolutely. Well, that's been serendipitous timing for you.
I know. I got lucky. It's funny. I tell people now, especially younger folks that are kind of coming up, when I was starting to drink, like so many Americans, there were no menus. You had to basically look over someone's shoulder, or you drank what your parents drank, you drank what your uncle drank. And this is a whole different world, really, since the mid 2000s, where we get these fancy cocktail menus with all these exciting ingredients. So I think people take it for granted now, but boy, it was an ugly era. I mean, there were good things about it too, but it was an ugly era of, juice out of cans, and who knows how fresh the lime juice was in that gimlet.
These kids, they don't even know how fortunate they are today.
I know, right?
All right, so maybe this is a silly question, because who wouldn't do this, but why travel the globe for cocktails? And why now? What did you sense was happening out there?
It's a really good question. It turned into be bizarre timing, for sure, for Booze Cruise, and that we had this pandemic follow right on the heels of it. But what I sensed was happening, is that, as far as I know, it seems like the cocktail revolution really got its start in London with Dick Bradsell, kind of headed to New York City, went around the United States, and then really started to go around the globe. It went back from London with Australian bartenders back to Melbourne. And then these London bartenders started to go all over the world, and American bartenders started to go all over the world. And it was fascinating timing, in that, a city like Singapore has really come online as this incredible craft cocktail spot just in the last 5 years. So this, I think, really took everyone by surprise. And I've been writing about cocktails for a long time. And it was this moment where, I certainly didn't get over there, when it was first exploding, but I was over there in 2019 when it had really already made some real inroads, where, restaurateur owners like Indra Cantono, he has a number of bars over in Singapore, and he had started some as early as, I think, 2016, 2014, but really it was just in the last few years that so many of these cities have come online. Cities like Athens, that really didn't have a cocktail scene much to speak of even 5 years ago, now are, have bars in the 50 best. And we see in that 50 best list, sort of every year a new city coming online, whether it's Taipei or Kuala Lumpur, or another city in Europe. So it was really a fascinating time to do a kind of a world tour of spots that would have craft cocktail bars now.
Absolutely. Yeah, the global explosion has just been astounding.
It's amazing.
It's a Cambrian explosion of cocktails. Well, I'm sure most of us are probably envious of your trip, but it certainly sounds like it was a hell of an undertaking. Tell us a little more about this Charles H. Baker-esque journey you went on.
Yeah, for people that might not be familiar, Charles H. Baker is this really hero in the cocktail community. He sort of is like those old cocktail recipes that we dug up during this last decade or more. We dug up this guy named Charles H. Baker, who had actually written for Town and Country and was fairly well known at the time. He ran around the world, I think, 3 times with his wife, mainly by steamship. And he wrote a couple of books called The Gentleman's Companion, and they are hilarious. But not only was he a hilarious writer, and the drinks in there, people like to redo them because the drinks are often not that great. But he really was capturing this moment in world history. And so when I was going to go around the world, I definitely had him in mind. I had read those books. They're uproariously funny. And I had it in mind, gee, I'm going to do this circumnavigation of the globe, which was really this fool's errand, which almost derailed the writing of the book, honestly, because it was, I had Google Maps for every city. I had, I start a little bit of my process in the background as I start with, emailing everyone I know, emailing people I don't know. I was using, Facebook groups, the Thirsty Magazine Facebook group out of New York City. I have to give a shout out for them. I just started finding people like wildfire when people started finding out that, this crazy guy is going to go flying around the world. And I had traveled before, but nothing like 11 cities basically in 60 days. So in and out of airports, 22 times, something like that. And my close friends thought, they would, sort of whisper to me, like, are you worried that you're going to die? And actually, yes, I was a little, this was actually a terrifying undertaking, but I wanted to see kind of, some of it was budget and I had to get back and, see as many interesting cities to me that I had not been to before, mainly in the Far East. And I wanted to see them as simultaneously as possible, bizarrely, just to kind of get this snapshot. Because, I had been to Paris a number of times. It's been a few years now. But, by the time I was writing this book, it really didn't matter that I had been there 2 years earlier. So much had, in theory, already changed. Now, did that change really get reflected in the book? Not necessarily. In the head note, for sure. And it became very clear that I was writing really more of a travel book with cocktails. And I think when people open it up, they realize that, there's a lot of work that went into putting people in place in these cities and what it's like, who's doing what. And, it just in a survey too, so I get about 3 paragraphs to do that. But it was fascinating because, there's these cities that I know really well, like Paris, but I hadn't been there, in 2019. So there was a lot of emailing back and forth, what's happening at, on the ground at, Red Door and some of these other, famous bars there. But yeah, it ended up being this bizarre experience, which was kind of exciting because I can include a lot of the information about these cities in the book. So it's a little bit more of an adventure book. There have been a couple other books that have come out in the market, some of them really excellent, about that are kind of geographically located, that take you to where the daiquiri was born and where this was born and where that was born. And I really wanted to make this a little bit of a contemporary book where people could open it up and really look like, oh, this is what's happening in Dubai. Maybe I should go there. I really wanted to just be inspiring to other people too, especially to Americans during this time, to get out and travel. And that was before the pandemic, obviously, but the message stays the same.
Always a good idea to travel for cocktails.
Yes.
All right, so along those lines then, what were some of the locations that maybe surprised you or really just knocked your cocktail socks off?
Well, my former publicist, Oleg Lubner, who is now a close friend of mine, is Ukrainian. And he was upset to find that Kiev was not on my itinerary. So I fixed that and flew there after Berlin and spent 5 days in Kiev. And that was a city that I think is not on the radar necessarily globally as a cocktail hotspot. I know they have a cocktail, they have sort of a cocktail week now that some American cocktails have flown over for in the past couple of years, but it's not a place that Americans think, Kiev, cocktails. And yet it is one of these perfect jewel box little cities where you can walk between all the bars, and the bartending that's taking place there is at really high level. And there are really exciting, sexy bars there. Kiev was sort of behind the Iron Curtain for a long time, and all the parties had to take place in these speakeasies. So basically, the speakeasies have been, sort of going, as the country has opened up and the economy has gone up there. So it's a speakeasy heavy town with incredible cocktails. That was certainly up on the top of my list as far as real surprises of just how deep this craft revolution has gone around the world. These guys probably were not doing this 5 years ago, 10 years ago to the same level they are now, but they're going to these national competitions and whatnot. And then of course, cities like Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Singapore, especially Singapore, which is making, every cocktail that you get is sort of a competition worthy cocktail, really is mind blowing. And just one of the common themes I learned on my trip was that, or was reinforced on the trip, was that cocktails follow good economies and they follow young, hungry populations. And Asia really nails that. They have these incredibly exploding economies. A city like Seoul, Seoul, Korea, which didn't have much in the way of cocktails. They're still kind of learning about them in a way, and yet they're a cocktail mad town already. And I only expect that in 3 years, things will get even crazier. So I think Asia, with that combination of exploding economies and exploding young populations with wanting to do this new exciting thing called cocktails, it's pretty exciting over in Asia right now, I have to admit.
Yeah, that was one of the things you mentioned when we had spoken previously, is that a through line that you noticed was that the cocktail bar seems to follow social optimism. I really love that idea.
Yeah, it was amazing. And when I went abroad, it really almost was a time machine in a way, because I would step out of my hotel room and into one of these cocktail bars, and just the excitement over these ingredients, the excitement about sitting at a bar, whether it was cozy or sort of like loud and rambunctious, or whether, but the common denominator was that there were these incredibly cosmopolitan bartenders and customers coming together for the first time in a new way over a new thing. And I think in the United States, even though, we had cocktails before, I think we can remember that, something happened that the cocktail bar codified in a new way as a new experience in a new kind of space, which is something that I'm sort of still, thinking about in my brain. But it really was a time warp, because I would walk into a bar and I thought, oh, this feels like 2004 in the best possible way. Everyone is so dang excited about cocktails, and it's something, we've gotten a little jaded, or, it's not every bar that you walk into and you feel like that again. So it was really wonderful.
We love to see the enthusiasm.
Oh, it's fantastic. It made me a reborn cocktail writer. I was like, that's right. This is why I got into this. This is really exciting. Cocktailers, I really do believe, are the best kind of people, right? They're hungry about information about the world already, because cocktails contain so much history in them and so many interesting ingredients from all over the world from inception.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it really does relate to the idea of the cocktail bar emerging relatively recently in some of these locations, especially as a new kind of third place.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. One of the most fascinating people I talked to on my journey was Keith Motzi, who's the head bartender at the Four Seasons in Seoul. And Korea is really fascinating. I'll just return to them really briefly, because here's a kind of a cold climate country. So cold climates like their cocktails for sure. They're cocktail bars, because you're stuck inside in cold weather for a long time. They have that going for them, and they love to drink. The Koreans have a really sophisticated, incredible drinking culture. And Keith basically is saying, it's only a matter of time. The bar that he's at is full, reservation full all the time since it opened. And he's like, Koreans and cocktails, they just love this. But it is something new. A lot of them have not had a lot of the classics before. You know, only in the last 2 years, they're sort of undergoing or going through what we went through. You know, like, wow, this is an aviation. You know, in 2005, that was really a big deal.
Well, as long as they're having fun, right?
Yeah, they're having a lot of fun. We're all going to be watching Soul very soon once that country goes cocktail crazy.
Oh man, I bet. Well, speaking of specific drinks, the book also includes a lot of really beautiful recipes, some familiar, some less so. How did you select the recipes? What did you want them to reflect?
Yeah, I really feel like food helps contextualize cocktails. It's not just good, you know, habit to have a little food while you're drinking, but I feel like the cocktails sort of emerged certainly through Prohibition with the foods that we know in the United States, stuff like deviled eggs, you know, are directly from sort of Prohibition kitchens. You know, some of the nuts that weren't available, you go back and look at the old cocktail books and they're all excited about cashews because cashews are new and they're the cocktailers nut. You know, we have some exciting, some really funny pairings with cocktails in our history. And I was kind of looking for, you know, we think of, you know, the Italians have their aperitivo hour. You get potato chips, you get nuts, you get olives, you might get little sandwiches if you get a Negroni or, you know, something stronger. But I was really looking for food that helped contextualize drinks. And it's interesting because in a lot of the world, the food that you think of with cocktails are sort of hangover food or where people go afterwards. So for instance, in Hong Kong, the thing to do is to get really drunk and then you go have momos. And for some reason, there's a momo scene, you know, a momocha, which are basically interior China, but they're really popular in Hong Kong. And you go have that, kind of like in the US where you go and have pizza, right? In New York City, you'll probably have a slice after drinking. But I really wanted to find some food that people have and they nosh while they're drinking. And that was really fun. I found quite a number of dishes that are really fascinating. I think one of my favorite is pickled camembert. You could just take store-bought camembert and basically you quick pickle it. I mean, you pickle it overnight, but it's still pretty quick. And this is a popular bar snack. And it makes so much sense when you have it. You know, it's in the same line of like cheese curds or, you know, cheese cubes that you get over here at cocktail parties, yet so much better. So I really had a great time with that. And I wanted to include that. And I wanted to help, you know, this book especially, I think, I really was thinking of the home bartender and how you bring these countries into your own home. And I think styling out a little food is important for that.
Oh, definitely. You got to have a little snack with your drink.
Right.
So within the cocktail canon, obviously there are classic drinks that stand the test of time and they travel the world. Did you find that a martini is a martini anywhere you go, or do you see a cultural imprint from place to place?
There's definitely a cultural imprint just in the ingredients, which is the easy answer. You know, people will put in yuzu or chrysanthemum. It's the same in the US here where, you know, you could find something that's like a little Southwest inflected in a martini or, you know, kind of, I guess more, I hate to use the word gimmick, but, you know, a sakatini were popular for a while. And does that transport you to Japan? I think on a conceptual level, I'm fascinated by the fact that maybe place is extraordinarily important to cocktails in the same way that, say, in fiction, place is really important to characters and the same character isn't the same in different spots in a novel. And I started to think about, these are the weird things you think about alone at night when you've traveled through too many cities and had too many cocktails. But I'm not convinced that that cocktail is the same in London as it is in Singapore, even though it's the same ingredients. There's just something different about, you know, the language that you overhear or the smells or the, you know, the aura that surrounds you. Also, I think there's real cultural differences that are important that you start to notice. For instance, in the United States, we go to cocktail bars to be really convivial, and they still tend to be loud, and we love to talk there. But in a country like Japan, there's a real expectation that going into kind of any restaurant establishment is going to give you a real reprieve from what is outside the door. And your apartment is small, your cubicle at work is small, and the restaurant is really expected to be sort of a meditative place. And I think the meditativeness of Japanese cocktail bars really takes people by surprise, and they think it's really on purpose, until you start to realize that this is a real cultural expectation for everyone, that they go into this bar and they have a moment of quiet, unless you're in like Golden Guy and you're partying, which is its own thing. But I would say for high-end cocktail bars in Japan, things are very, very, very quiet. And I feel like that aura does tend to change your cocktail experience.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I mean, you think about the presentation as well. I mean, I know you mentioned the sheer amount of showmanship that you see in a place like Singapore.
Right. Oh, I might be losing you.
Oh, you're back. Good.
I'm back.
All right, I'll go back off screen now.
Okay. We glitched for 1 second there. Hello, we're back.
All right, we all back on track? Did you get any of that last question?
Sorry, no. Can you repeat quickly?
Yeah. No, just thinking about how cocktails are presented in different ways, and like the levels of showmanship that you saw in a place like Singapore.
Yeah, the showmanship is really phenomenal. And, also I think in some of these countries, it's very, it can be more, like in New York City, it's difficult to go across town. So there's an expectation that when you get there, there's going to be this great level of experience for the work that you've put in to get there. Sorry, we cut out again.
I got your voice.
Oh, you did? Okay. Sorry, I think it's me that's cutting out. I'm not sure. Wednesday night in Philadelphia.
Get it All right, cool.
Let's see if we can make it through this next question.
I mean, I guess with you mentioned how it was interesting, the timing of this book, whether that was good luck or bad, and certainly bars suffered quite a bit this past year. Yeah. How do you see sort of the state of the cocktail bar re-emerging as we're coming out on the other side of this thing?
I've been really hopeful. I've been really worried about some cities. One of those cities that I've been worried about is Chicago here in the United States. It's a cold weather city. I've seen a lot of great bars under a lot of stress. I think the colder the climate, the worse things kind of were for the COVID situation, because people couldn't have outdoor seating. I saw a lot of bartenders head south, for jobs, which was fantastic during this time. One of the interesting, but on the upside, as things hopefully start to open up and bars make it through this time, I think that because so many people were making drinks for themselves, I'm hopeful that we see another kind of emergence the way we did in the initial wave of the craft cocktail revolution. And I think people forget that back then, a lot of it was fomented by sort of amateurs or prosumers who were online blogging and digging up these old cocktails, and that they were really having kind of a feedback loop with some of the great bars. In fact, some of the great bars hired these, who had been amateur pros to come and start craft cocktailing. And I really see that there's so many people getting into cocktails. It's really funny, when we were approached to write the new cocktail hour in 2016, which seems now, especially since the pandemic, a whole lifetime of cocktails ago. But even at that time, I sort of thought in the back of my mind, oh, this is kind of run its course. This is ending. And I couldn't have been more wrong. It was just beginning, where every restaurant now has to have, quote unquote, craft cocktails. And it's really mainstream, and people people all over know their Manhattans, you know, from their whiskey sours, and they, you know, sometimes they know French 75s, and they certainly know Negronis, you know, which has really come into American culture in a big way. So I'm really hopeful that these, you know, home bartenders who have been, you know, reading books and watching YouTubes and hopefully coming to book larder cocktail, you know, talks, are going to come out of this as really great consumers and help raise the bar for everyone. Because, you know, these craft cocktail bars, they want educated consumers too, and they've done a lot to educate the American consumer. But the more people that get interested in good cocktails, I really believe, you know, the better it is for everyone. So I'm really hopeful that we're going to come out of this really strong, actually.
100%. Yeah. It's an interesting point. I was actually speaking recently with Ryan Chediwardana, aka Mr. Lion, and he had done the masterclass with Lynette Marrero, which also happened to launch sort of just as we were all getting shut down in our homes. And it's like, oh, what a great time to be making cocktails at home. And his takeaway was that, you know, we only benefit from having more educated, informed cocktailers. So if you're learning more at home and you're mixing drinks yourself, you're setting yourself up to go into a cocktail bar and have a better experience.
I really agree. I don't think it's a zero-sum game in that, you know, the more sophisticated people get at home, the fewer people are going out to bars. I really think it's the opposite, you know, because there's always these sort of kingpins at home, you know, men and women that both love their cocktails and sort of are making it for themselves and their friends, and they're turning people on in their backyards during, you know, summer like this. And then those folks go to a craft cocktail bar that they've never gone to before because they sort of get it and they get turned on to it. So it's sort of like a, you know, the cocktail religion, right? Everybody gets turned on to at a certain point, and you stop, you know, drinking, you know, let's not mention White Claw, but maybe you stop drinking White Claw for an evening to go out to a cocktail bar. Not to judge, because we are in summer, and of course the spritz is never far away from any of our hands. But I think cocktail bars really will have a great time after so many people at home have been consuming cocktail information.
Absolutely, it's a delicious win-win situation.
Yes.
All right, kind of a silly question, but I'm sure people want to know any kind of like cocktail related misadventures that you might have had while on this whirlwind trip around the world, or miscommunications or misunderstandings.
There were definitely some funny episodes. I was playing it pretty careful in order to actually make it around the world. One thing I realized, that when you're heavy traveling, you really need to know what the currency differential is for $100 versus American money versus $1. Because every website that you look on will tell you the conversion rate for $1. But what is $100 when something is 100,000 or 1,000,000, you know, so how many zeros do you go? And I definitely, with fellow travelers, we would get to an ATM in a country, and it is amazing to watch people that have not slept basically in 24 hours and may have had cocktails the night before, take out unbelievable sums from the ATM machine that then cannot be returned. And in my case, I have 4 days to spend it. Now, if you're in Europe and you're traveling on, if you're in Europe and you're traveling on to another EU country, you're fine. But if you're somewhere in Asia and you've converted a lot of your money into Asian currency out of the ATM, so there's really funny things like that. I think, you know, one of the thing, you know, some of the best misadventures were you know, bartenders love to get into trouble, and they love to get into trouble together. So we had definitely some fun van rides across Bangkok after everybody was off work. And basically it just turns into finding the best street food that is available. So that's never bad. But yeah, the misadventures are always just funny, really basic traveler mistakes.
I mean, that's what makes the trip, right?
It really does make the trip. And, you know, as veteran travelers will tell you, you often later in life only remember what you think at the time was a really bad misadventure. Mm-hmm. But it turns out to be the thing that you remember most, because, you know, when things go off the rail and don't run smoothly is when you find out, really interesting things about another culture and yourself.
Absolutely. All right, so returning to the book for a second, you mentioned that you styled it to be as much of a travel and adventure book as you did a cocktail book. What do you hope that readers will take away from it?
Yeah, I really hope that readers will take away a sense of adventure here. I put, this was a difficult book to write in that I didn't want to just have a bare survey going around the world and sort of hitting boilerplate cocktails. There's a few of that sometimes when it seems to be unavoidable. For a city like Singapore, the essential drink is the Singapore Sling, even though it's a tourist drink and no one really drinks it there. But for an American audience, they do want to see it, and they do want to see a good version. There's so many bad versions out there, so a good version of that. But it was difficult to know the depth to go in the book, which is to say that I really tried to make it ingredients that Americans could find readily in a Asian grocery store, Latin grocery store, a good gourmet grocery store, or on Amazon if you have to.
Mm-hmm.
And I really tried to come up with ingredients that you could bring into your home bar while having an experience of a cocktail that you've never had before with ingredients that you've never had before. I think something like I have a Filipino cocktail in there that uses banana ketchup, which I'm really bullish on banana ketchup. It's a bizarre ingredient. Banana ketchup, probably did originate in the Philippines, but it's also a copy of American ketchup that came over. It actually doesn't have tomato in it, but it's colored red, but it's made out of bananas. It has a really wonderful flavor and really wonderful acidity, and it's just so great shaken into cocktails in the same way that we shake jams and jellies, marmalade, like in the breakfast martini. You can kind of do the same thing with banana ketchup. So everybody thinks it's really funny until they try the drink, and it's really fantastic. Readily available in the United States, pretty much at every Asian grocery store, but is going to take you to the Philippines and going to take you to an ingredient that you may not know about. And I hope that then people Google and find out, well, what do people put banana ketchup on? What is the Philippines like? And then maybe a year later, so you're buying a ticket to the Philippines. That's my big hope. It's a gateway drug. It's a great gateway drug to exploring the world.
We'd all be better off.
But I really do hope that it's all about expanding people's horizons and minds, and making people realize that going to other countries for cocktails is doable and actually preferential, because if you were to hunt through this book or online and find great cocktail bars, you could center a trip around every major city around the little cluster of cocktail bars. You're going to be in a great neighborhood. You're going to find great, interesting people from there, and all over the world. Cocktail bars are really sort of these portals, I think, into other parts of the world. There was not a single city that I sat down in a great bar in and did not meet fascinating people from that city, but also from all over the world. And in a way that's not just an airport lounge, in a way where you have a common denominator of things that you're interested in that you can compare. So it's just a great way to travel the world. I'm biased, but
you're looking for good company, head to the cocktail bar.
Exactly. And I always tell people, like a good bartender is so much better than a hotel concierge. Head to a good restaurant and ask them where to go, and they know the museums, they know the arts, they know where the other good spots are, they know everything. So they're really as good or better than a taxi driver.
Oh, absolutely. They know it all. All right, I've got one more question for you, but I also want to give everybody a heads up to start mulling on any questions you might have for André. And there's a little Q&A box, so make sure you drop your questions into the Q&A box and not into the chat box, although I'll try and keep an eye on those.
Yeah, I just want to do a couple quick shout outs. I know my sister is on here. We wrote a few books together. The last one was Booze and Vinyl. We were at Booklarder. And also to Moses Koh, who's on here. It's really early in the morning for Moses. He's from Singapore. He's sort of the ambassador of the Singapore bar world. He's mentioned in my book. If you dig around the book and you find yourself in Singapore, you should definitely check out his website, where all Singapore events go through, and Moses was incredibly hospitable to me. So it's great to see him on here. Hello.
Fantastic. I'm so glad you could join us. All right. Well, with the world now beginning to reopen and travel becoming a possibility again, what places are at the top of your next cocktail itinerary? Where do you need to go next?
Good question. I've been watching this very closely because I have a real travel itch. I was down in Costa Rica, actually visiting with a bartender who's mentioned in this book, Liz Furlong, who's a self-styled jungle bartender. I put a few bartenders in here. It's not random, but it was definitely people that I thought were really taking this craft cocktail world and lessons to heart. You know, Liz, when she got to Costa Rica a number of years ago, people were still making drinks that had nothing to do with Costa Rica. They were just tropical. And she's really helped a number of bars in San Jose and around the country sort of develop cocktail programs that speak of place, which is important to me. And I feel like is sort of, you know, the next wave of cocktails, or not next, it's already happening. But whenever you see a bar that's doing interesting stuff, you know, there's a bar in Paris that only serves French liquor. That's interesting to me. It's really unique. I'm not saying every bar needs to be like that, but I did focus on some bartenders around the world who are doing that. So I went to Costa Rica, one, because I could, two, because I wanted to meet up with Liz and see what was going on in the jungle down there. When this opens up, if I could go anywhere, I would head right back to Asia. You know, even when I was there, I'm worried about the folks in Hong Kong. I would love to see the Singapore scene again. So I think that, you know, if people are watching and they want to know where to go, anywhere in the world, London is fantastic, New York's fantastic, you know, but really, if you want to see some of these really great cities that are having a moment, I would say Hong Kong and Singapore are certainly two of those, Taipei as well. But yeah, I have my sights on that. I personally also fell in love with Bangkok. I was able to meet up with a number of fascinating people there. It has a growing cocktail scene as well, and incredible street food. So you really can't go wrong with hitting up Southeast Asia right now.
So many places to go.
So many places to go in so little time, but you know, you can visit them all in 5-day periods over 60 days and kill yourself. You know, I was actually, this is funny, I was dreaming up. I literally have been watching the news and see who's opening up, and I thought maybe I should circumnavigate the world again. And then I put that idea away.
Well, relating to that actually perfectly is our first Q&A question from Lydia. Who did you do your traveling with, and how many months were you on the road for? Did you do it all at once, or did you come home in between?
So I did a couple of trips earlier in that year. I had been to Rome, I had been to London. I guess they were kind of wind-ups. I went to London Cocktail Week. But yes, the main circumnavigation of the globe, I started in late 2019. I spent about 60 days going around. So I ended up spending, I can't remember where I think I was in Athens for Thanksgiving. And then I was in Seoul, Korea at Christmas. I met up with a couple people early in the trip. I had some really fun people that I just either randomly met or I was hooked up with before I left. You know, somebody like I just mentioned, Moses Coe, I ran around with him for a few nights in Singapore, which in a spot like that is really great to have a guide and a local. And then my girlfriend blessedly came to join me towards the end of the trip, which was fantastic because just culturally, in a lot of the Asian cities, people tend to not eat out alone, certainly at night. At cocktail bars, yes. But, you know, if you want to go to a great, you know, roast goose restaurant in Hong Kong, you're going to sit in the back with a lot of old bachelors. So it was fantastic that she was able to meet up with me. And so I had a dining partner for the last half of the trip. And I wasn't alone on Christmas when Kim Jong-un was, you know, threatening to shoot rockets at Seoul. So we had a wonderful, wonderful time at Christmas instead of me being alone. Because, you know, the travel does get pretty lonely, especially towards the end of the trip. And again, especially, you know, culturally in some cities where people just aren't alone. I did do quite a few tour guides. you know, people that I found or I hooked up with, again, so that when I land, I could go to the market and kind of get acclimatized into the food scene. So often, you know, one of the websites that I used was withlocals.com, which I don't know if there's that much of activity of it in the United States. But that was a fascinating, a great way to meet people, because they hook you up with basically local food writers. If I couldn't find somebody already through Facebook or the various, you know, back channels, back bartender channel that I was using, definitely just going and doing something like that will start to get you moving in the right direction, which I find really important in a country, especially one that you can't read the language, or, you know, so, you know, going to a market by yourself without a translator only goes so far, because you don't know what it is, even when you look at it, and then you won't know what the name is to look it up later either. You're in the catch-22 of foreign markets.
Yeah, and you really had to hit the ground running, especially for your primary itinerary. I think you described it to me as around the world in 60 hangovers.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds about right.
You know, I'm not a young man anymore, and, you know, going out and going on cocktail safaris, I think, is a young man's game. So I played it pretty careful, but there were definitely some mornings that I encountered a little harder than I would have liked.
Yeah. All right, we had another question pop up in the chat, but I'm on it. Is there a particular liquor that is being utilized most often across the different countries? And this is from Christine.
It's interesting. There are probably three giants. Shoju is a giant liquor that Americans don't know. It's one of the top most consumed liquors in the world, and it's basically a rice wine that can be low proof, but can also not be low proof. So it's a little scary, and you encounter that everywhere from, you know, China to, you know, it means, the original word is burnt wine in Chinese, so you encounter it shochu or shoju in Korea, Japan, all over the Far East. So that's one that is a huge one. Vodka still dominates a lot of the globe, so that's just kind of the global thing. I would say when you're encountering, one of the fascinating things is that in warm climate countries, you kind of cross this sours line, I like to call it, where suddenly you're getting a lot of fruit juice. You know, you're getting a lot of daiquiri, you're getting a lot of citrus, and that tends to be rum. So I would say a vast majority of the globe is probably drinking rum, just because a lot of the population of the world lives in kind of these warmer climates. So that was fairly interesting. But you know, there's a huge gin scene in Australia that seems to be floating north very quickly. So that in Asia, I was drinking a lot of Australian gin, which I found really fascinating. And also the gin is really fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So you run into, it depends, the craft cocktail bars tend to have a lot of what you see all over the globe. But there are some regional differences, and I would say sort of rum is probably the one that you start to see the most when people are kicking their shoes off and putting on flip-flops.
I love it. The sour latitude.
There's the sour latitude. It's in Latin America. You cross it headed south, and you cross it headed east. You know, basically after I went east from Dubai, I crossed heavily into the sours line.
All right. Well, we have just a tiny bit of time left. If there are any more questions out there just begging to be answered, now is your chance.
Do we have any questions out there? Questions for going around the globe. So the book is a little more than 40 of the greatest cocktail cities around the world. That was more of a random number than anything. So there could certainly be 40 more if my editor's watching.
That's good.
You know, and you know, and one of the continents that I think is coming online for the future is definitely Africa. Lagos, Nigeria has exploding wealth over the last few years from a lot of it is oil money, but then it has gone into other sectors. I have not made it to Lagos, Nigeria, but that is also something that's on my list of spots to go. because there's a number of cocktail bars that have opened there. So that's something that I think in the future, if this book were to be redone, there'd be a lot more, probably will be a lot more Africa that we'll be seeing in the future, which is really exciting.
Yeah, very cool. We do have one more question from your sister tonight.
All right.
Which I think is the perfect question to end on. She wants to know which bar stands out as most memorable.
Which bar stands out as most memorable? Really hard question to ask. I went to this really bizarre bar in Kiev where everyone was blowing gold glitter at each other. And I have to say that stands out. And they were blowing glitter at each other out of the halves of passion fruit. And everyone, I got there and it was quite cold weather. So it felt very exotic to me. It was out of sort of a James Bond movie where everybody was in their furs. The men were in these tall boots with their mustaches. And it felt like something out of another planet. But also I have really memorable experiences of being in a bar called Alice, which is one of the 50 best bars in the world in Seoul, Korea. And they just had these incredible jewel boxes. The whole bar was centered around Alice in Wonderland, including the drinks. So it is a wonderful wide world of cocktails out there. And you can really stumble into some unbelievable situations, which is worthy of somebody doing on a travel channel to go to some of these bars.
Absolutely. Is that your pitch?
That's my pitch.
Right,
I'll see you in the Far East, Penelope.
let's go. All right, André, thank you so much for talking to us about your book and sharing stories from your travels. It sounds like such an amazing time, and it is a really beautiful book. Everybody should pick it up for sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this with me and taking your time on a Wednesday night on what should be probably a beautiful summer evening out there. And thank everyone for wanting to hear about cocktails. I'm gonna have just really quick on my website, I'll put up a couple of cocktails from the book that are perfect for backyard summer parties. Or I can send it to Bookloader. I don't know quite how they do it here, but certainly up on my website, so people can get a little. I know there are a couple, recipes floating out there online already, but I'll put up some that are perfect for your July 4th weekend, which is coming up, which is everyone's next big cocktail soiree, right?
Yeah. That'd be perfect. I can share that in the post event message.
Excellent.
Send that to me. But it was such a pleasure meeting the both of you, André and Penelope, and learning more about cocktails around the world. I really am like itching to get out of town now. I'm itching to get on a plane somewhere, but in the meantime, we've got this to get us through. Yes. We've got copies again of Booze Cruise available at bookloader.com. We do have some signed ones, so thank you to André for sending those signed book plates on to us. Available at bookloader.com. And again, this conversation will be on our YouTube channel after the event. So if you want to listen back and remember some of the cocktails that were mentioned or the destinations that were mentioned, we will have that posted up there within 48 hours. And everyone that registered will also get a link to watch that back. But thank you both. Thank you everyone who attended today. We hope to see you someday in Seattle soon when it is safe to travel and to sip cocktails around the world again.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks to Bookloader for hosting.
Thank you so much. Fantastic evening.
Night.
Good night.